Asato ma sadagamaya tamaso homaham jyotirgamaya mrityormam amritam gamaya avir ahavir maedhi Rudra yate dakshinam mukha te namaha pahinityam. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. And reach us through and through ourselves, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. So my subject this morning is the inner light. And we're going to begin by talking about light, and then we'll talk about inner light. Now, those of you who are students of Hinduism, you know that there are many gods and goddesses, and many incarnations who embody those gods. And in Vedanta, we would say that these are all aspects of one supreme person, the personal God. And every one of these aspects pretty much has a temple dedicated to them somewhere in India. Thousands of temples. And no doubt a festival day during which devotees would gather and sing the name and glories of that aspect of the personal God. But in order to appreciate our subject this morning, we've got to go far back into time, into the Vedic period that is before the evolution of the conception of a personal God, and before the conception of God as an anthropomorphic form. The ancient Vedic peoples used to worship light beings. That is, they worshipped the dawn. They worshipped the lightning and the moon and the sun. And of course, the sacrificial fire, which carried the offerings upwards into heaven. These gods were called the Devas. And the Deva is a Sanskrit word, comes from the Indo-European root, div, which we recognize as divinity. That is, a Deva is a shining being. It's a light being that is worshipped as a divinity, usually under one of the forms of the powers of nature. And those people who worshiped those light beings were called the Aryans. And Aryan literally means the children of the light. Let me give you an example here of one of those light gods. Maybe the best example that I can think of would be the sun in the sky. Surya Deva. It's hard for us to imagine any conception of God that could be more grand and impressive than the sun shining in the sky, from which comes all of our heat, all the light by which we see, all the power, all the energy in the world. It's not just solar power, but wind power. Why wind moves? Because the atmosphere is heated at different the topography of the earth. It's just heated by the sun at different degrees, and so the wind blows. What about hydroelectric power? What about electricity? Well, where do we get most of our electricity? Well, it comes maybe from hydroelectric power, water flowing, rivers to the ocean, turning great turbines. Of course, it's all part of the water cycle, which is all driven ultimately by the sun. Surya Deva, still worshipped today by pious Hindus. You see them in the morning by the river Ganges, looking up at the sun, holding their hands kind of in a crosswork so they can look straight at the sun, and reciting the Gayatri mantra, which is kind of like the Lord's Prayer of Hinduism. So let's look here at this idea of the light. Light is a natural symbol for divinity. And light also is a natural symbol for knowledge. Because knowledge, just as light removes darkness, so also knowledge removes ignorance. And ignorance causes suffering. That's why we're interested in knowledge. That's why this is called the Vedanta society. This is the knowledge society. Because we're interested in the ultimate knowledge that will remove ignorance. Now, what's the connection? Why does ignorance cause suffering? Well, every person in the world is struggling to achieve what they think, what they believe is good. This is the buddhi. The buddhi and the will naturally, by their nature, tend towards the good. The possession of the good gives us happiness. And therefore everyone wants to achieve what they think is good. Of course, different people have different ideas of what is good. That's because we exist on different vibrational levels of consciousness. Some portion of the humanity is at a very low level of consciousness. Some small portion is a very high level of consciousness. And we're all somewhere in between, each having a different conception of what is the good, but nevertheless, unless we're enlightened, we're still seeing through a glass darkly, and thus we're going to suffer. And Vedanta teaches us that there are two kinds of knowledge, the lower and the higher. Both of them remove ignorance. But it's only the higher knowledge that removes spiritual ignorance, that is the veil that covers our true nature that hides our soul from ourself. Now this is an important teaching of the Vedanta philosophy, that it's only knowledge that removes ignorance. Let's say that you were going to come into a room, and there was going to be a class there, but it was pitch dark. And everyone had arrived, but everyone was kind of stumbling over the tables and chairs. Nobody could see what was going on. It was all confusion. And, what would be the solution to that problem? Well, maybe you may think, as a good devotee, you may think, well, just get down on your knees and pray to God. Maybe he'll straighten things out. Maybe you think, well, no, I will just, I'll go out and maybe I can distribute alms to the poor and the suffering. And maybe that will change things and help us for where we are. And like this, we could imagine various alternatives, but we know that the only rational thing, really, to do would be to go over and turn on the light. Turn on the light switch, removes the darkness, everyone would look around, find their seats, and the class could begin. Now, there's a Swami who came to America in 1902. He was one of the first Swamis to come to preach the Vedanta philosophy. He was technically not of our order, but he was a follower inspired by Swami Vedarupananda. His name was Swami Ramatirtha. And if you see maybe in the bookstore, you see the volumes, 6 volumes, In the Woods of God Realization. He was good at telling all these interesting stories that illustrated the themes of the Vedanta non-dualism. And it so happens that there was a village, and the people living in the village found themselves very near to that, overlooking the village. There was a large cave. And the mouth of that cave was just total darkness. And it kind of loomed down over the village. And as time passed, people began to feel kind of uncomfortable by this mouth kind of looming over this bad omen looming over the village. The demon darkness. And they began to worry about it and think about it, and it kind of became like a collective shadow for them. And they wanted to try to somehow get rid of it. So once in a while, a boy would walk by there and he'd throw some stones in there, hoping maybe to kill that demon darkness. And then some others went there. They had a bow and they had an arrow. They tried that. They tried a spear, threw that in there. It just disappeared. And so their fear grew, and they didn't know what to do. Till one day a boy came by that way, just traveling along, seeking his fortune. He said, well, what's the problem here? He told him about that demon darkness. Well, that boy looked around, he went over and he got a torch. He lit a torch, he said, well, let's see about that. He walked into the mouth of the cave, looked around, nothing there. Walked deeper and deeper into the cave. Didn't see much there. Walked down there at the very end of the cave. What did he see? He saw a box. Well, it was a treasure chest. Oh, he was so happy, and one by one, the villagers who had crept behind him, following him into the cave, they were overjoyed to find this treasure and to see that the demon darkness had been dispelled. And so in this way, that boy became a hero. Because light removes darkness. Knowledge removes suffering. Knowledge removes ignorance, and ignorance causes suffering. If we can remove that darkness, then we can remove our suffering. In the 4th chapter of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, that is the great forest Upanishad, King Janaka approached the sage Yajnavalkya, and he asked him a question. And his question was, "O sage, what serves as a light for man?" And Yajnavalkya replied, "Well, the sun indeed is his light, O king. For by the light of the sun, he goes out, he works, and he returns." "Yeah, quite so," said King Janaka. "But when the sun has set, then what serves as a light for man?" And Yajnavalkya, "Well, when the sun has set, well, the moon indeed is his light, O king. For by the light of the moon, he can go out and work and return." "Well, quite so," said King Janaka. He said, "But when the sun set and the moon has set also, then what serves as a light for man?" And Yajnavalkya replied, he said, "Well, then the fire indeed is his light, O king, because by the light of the fire, he can go out and work and return." "Yeah, quite so, Yajnavalkya." But then he asked, "But when the sun is set and the moon is set and the fire has gone out, then what serves as a light for man?" And Yajnavalkya replies, "Then speech indeed is his light, O king. For by hearing the voices of another person guiding him along, he can go out and he can work and return." And yes, well, quite so, Yajnavalkya, said Janaka. "But when the sun is set and the moon is set, and the fire has gone out, and there is no speech, then what serves as a light for man? Then the Atman, the soul, indeed, is his light, O king. For by the light of the self, he goes out, he works, and returns." So these are the passages from the Upanishad. And we can see now that we're equating here the light. We've equated light with divinity, with knowledge, and now we're equating light with the self, with our own, that is our own consciousness. And we can see, well, while you walk around during the day, you know that you need light. You have the sun. You go inside, well, you can turn on a light. And so you can make your way through the waking state. But what about when you fall asleep? When you fall asleep, there too you see a whole world of trees and houses and people. But where is the light coming from? Can't be coming from the sun. It can't be coming from the electric light inside your body. You may say, well, it's encoded in your memory. It's just a memory. The light imprint of the natural light is imprinted and encoded in a picture, just like a photograph. But not really, because when you look at a photograph in a dark room, you need a light. Therefore, we can see here that they're the philosophers of ancient times, beginning now to question more deeply, what do we mean here by light? In a philosophical sense, is our consciousness. The source of the light is the consciousness. And that's a strong claim. That all of the lights burning in the external world, like the sun and moon, that the source of it all is our own consciousness. And there's a verse there in the Katha Upanishad that goes like this: Na tatra suryo bhati na chandra tarakam nema vidyuto bhanti kutoyam agnihi tameva bhantam anubhati sarvam tasya bhasa sarvam idam vibhati. That's a famous verse from thousands of years ago. There it says, the sun does not shine there, nor the moon, nor the stars, nor these lightnings, nor these earthly lights. But it shining, that means the Atman, that means your consciousness. It shining, all of these other things shine in turn. That is, it is your consciousness which is the source of all of the external lights. So now we've associated light with divinity, with knowledge, with consciousness, with the self, and with the source of really that which we seek. You know, there's a fundamental teaching of the wisdom of the East. That what is it that we seek in our life? Well, it's very simple. We seek to be who we really are. That's all we want to accomplish. How do we do that? Well, we're going to search. Well, on a previous occasion, I told a story about that Brahmin widow. Remember, she was a seamstress. And she was sitting one day in her little cottage, sewing and sewing in the afternoon. Gradually the sun set and it grew dark. And she dropped her sewing needle. Well, what could she do? She couldn't continue work. So she got up and she went over and she put on her shawl. Went over, I went out the front door, down the steps, down the little lane in which she lived, onto the main street, turned the corner, walked down the street until she found a bright street lamp. And there she began looking around under that lamp. And, well, it wasn't long before a police patrolman came by that way. I said, "Excuse me, madam, seems like, have you lost something?" She said, "Yeah, I've lost my sewing needle." "Oh, let me help you find it," said the policeman. So he looked around, got down on his hands and knees, looked all around under the light. Couldn't find it. He said, "Are you sure that you lost it here?" And she said, "Oh, no, sir, I lost it back in my house." He said, "Well, what are you looking for it here for?" Well, you see, this is where the light is. This is where the light is. Well, seems like she was a foolish woman. But in fact, that's exactly our condition. We are exactly like that Brahmin widow, searching for what we have lost, That is our true nature. We're distanced, we're alienated from our true self. Where do we look for it? Well, we open our eyes. And in the Katha Upanishad again, that same chapter, there's another famous verse. You may ask, well, why did I quote? Why did you quote that Sanskrit? Why don't you just give us a translation? We don't need to hear all this, the Sanskrit. And the reason why I quoted for that Tatra Suryo Bhati, because we were required to memorize these things in the monastery. And so occasionally I find, well, if I could use it, I might as well use it. So, in any case, there's another verse in there which simply says, think back to the most ancient times before anybody knew anything about soul, God, and religion. There must have been one person who was the first person in the history of humanity to look within, to close their eyes, and to get the bright idea, what I'm looking for, I haven't found it anywhere out there. Maybe if I look within myself, I can find it. What a brilliant idea. He was the first. We don't know his name. We don't know who he was. But it must have been somebody who got that idea at the very beginning, that call to introspection. And that's really what this is about. This is about the call to introspection of the wisdom of the East. And you remember how Sri Ramakrishna tells us about the man. He loved to smoke. And he would smoke these little beedies, that is like the very hand-rolled cigarettes. And he woke up in the middle of the night, and it was about 1 a.m, and he felt, he thought to himself, I have to have a smoke. No question about it. But he realized he was out of matches. Now what could he do? He couldn't just turn over and go to sleep. He was a smoker. So, he got up, put on his clothes, went downstairs, took the lantern from the window, burning in the window there, picked it up, opened the front door, went out, like the Brahmin widow. He went out the door and walked next door. And he knocked and knocked on the door of the neighbor until the window opened, second story. Neighbor looked down. Hello? What's the matter? Said, oh, sir, I want to smoke. I don't have any matches. And the neighbor was so vexed. He was furious. He said, well, you fool, disturbing everyone in the middle of the night. Can't you see that you have a lighted lantern in your hand? Oh, he didn't notice. He didn't notice that. Well, he could have just lit his smoke by that lantern. But he didn't think of that. And so like this, we're talking the teaching here, that is the teaching of Vedanta, is a call to introspection, to turn our minds and our hearts within. Therefore, let's look here at the second part. We look here about the inner light. The inner light. Now, our subject of, when we think about the inner light, we're going to be coming out of the framework of the practice of the great path of meditation called Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga, Patanjali's Raja Yoga, is the source book for all forms of meditation. And it's really the science of focus and concentration. 8 stages, which you're very well familiar with those different stages of meditation. And the highest application of this science is to meditate on your own Purusha, that is your own soul. In Vedanta we call it the Atman, that is your true self. That is spirit, your spiritual self, who you really are. That's really the purpose of meditation as it's taught in Vedanta. And Patanjali gives us detailed explanation and directions about how to meditate on the Purusha. But now wait a minute, the Purusha, the soul, the spirit, is infinite. That is, it's formless. It's beyond space and time. It's spirit. That's what spirit is. Spirit is by definition unlimited. And therefore, we can't think about it. We can't grasp it with our minds. And therefore, in order to meditate on the spirit, we need to have some symbol. And many symbols can be used. Different forms that will enable us to grasp and to conceptualize and to visualize a representation of ourself. We can't see yourself directly, just like the eyes cannot see themselves. But you can conceptualize and visualize that symbol. And maybe the most famous symbol there that Patanjali suggests is that of an inner light that's burning like a light burning in a windless place. It's called Angushta Matra Purusho Jyotir Iva Dhumaka. That means it's a light that is the size of a thumb, very small light, the size of a thumb that's burning without any smoke within the cave of your heart. Now that's Patanjali's, one of his suggestions for how to meditate on the soul, on yourself. Remember, in Vedanta, yoga psychology, you can't meditate on the sky. You can't meditate on space because you can't wrap your brain around it. Therefore, you got to have something tangible, something that you can see, something that you can visualize and perceive. Now, when you think about this, just taking this as an example, there are many other different kinds of meditation recommended by Patanjali, but just taking this as an example, it's important for us to note that we don't want to strain our eyes trying to look for this light inside of ourselves. Because there's no candle that's burning inside your body. There's no hot flame that's burning, electric light that's burning in there. And so psychologically, you think, well, I've got to see something. You're trying to see, so you're not trying to see something. But what happens in yoga, as Patanjali tells us, that as you begin to focus more and more on holding this image, steadily before the intention and the focus and the concentration, that your mind necessarily becomes more and more calm and more concentrated. Because you can't focus and concentrate unless you become detached and desireless. And as you become more and more advanced, you become calmer and quieter, and you become more and more still. Then the meaning of the light, that is, that light that you're meditating on, is not something to be seen. It's something that has a meaning. It means something. It's like a finger that's pointing to you. It's like and what does it mean? Well, it just means yourself. You become aware of your true, your spiritual self. That is your calm, peaceful, focused self. Okay, the inner light. You can read Patanjali in order to get more details on that and the commentators. Remember that there was a singer, a songwriter, and his name was Hank Williams. Hank Williams was a Shakespeare of country music. And he wrote a famous song that was called, what is it called? Light? Not lead kindly light. Let there be light. Light, O light. Let there be light. Well, you got a few verses in that song. Let's look at those few verses. Kind of illustrate what we're trying to say. What does it mean when we're trying to say, to see the light? What does that mean? Well, the first verse there, he says, I wandered alone, and my life full of sin. I wouldn't let my pure Savior in. Then Jesus came like a stranger in the night. Praise the Lord, I saw the light. That's the refrain of the chorus of the song, I saw the light. And first we can see, yeah, well, that's pretty good. Kind of suggests a vision of some kind of a divine being who appears to us in a vision. Certainly that would be a spiritual experience. That would be an experience of divinity. Second verse there. Second verse he says, I wandered along and what is that? I wandered along and fear and worries and fears I claim for my own. He said, I wandered like a blind man. Like a blind man, I wandered along. And worries and fears I claim for my own. And then like the blind man, for whom God restored his sight, praise the Lord, I saw the light. The second verse, kind of a good analogy. We're blind, spiritual blindness. If I could have our sight restored, as it were, then we could realize our true nature. So I saw the light. What does that mean? Well, it just gives some different perspectives on what that means. The third verse there, he says, I wandered like a fool. He said, I wandered astray.